Hello, I'm George Malin, a contributing editor with Light Reading, and today I'm talking to Ronan Kelly, the CTO for EMEA and APAC at ADTRAN, about market conditions following COVID-19 and looking ahead into 2021. Ronan, how has COVID-19 changed or accelerated the adoption of fibre?
Well, George, I think it's fair to say it's really turned the attitudes towards fibre with all stakeholders in society, whether that's students, parents, employers, or government officials. Probably more importantly, it's turned the attitudes towards fibre on their head. What we've seen is a really pronounced focus now on the importance of very reliable, very high capacity with low latency broadband, particularly for the types of activities that we're engaged in right now, the likes of the Zoom video conference calls that are being used simultaneously across households where you've got two parents working at the same time, two or three kids trying to remote learn at the same time. It's really become mission critical. It's come front and center now at this point.
Okay, so many predicted last year that SDX would be the hot topic of 2020. In what ways have we seen this come to fruition, and how has ADTRAN been able to capitalise on that?
There's no question SDX has definitely gone up the ranks with regard to hot topic. I'd love to say it was the hot topic of 2020. Alas, it wasn't. Supply chain ended up being the hot topic for 2020, but we can park that for another conversation. But certainly what we've seen now is we spent probably the last 3-4 years now really trying to educate the market with regard to the benefits of the disaggregated open architectures. And now what we've seen this year is we've had 4 tier 1s in this year alone, and we haven't even finished the year yet, have adopted SDX and announced to the market that they're deploying it within their network. So a really fantastic turnaround. That's also starting to create a pull through from the smaller operators, because what they really like about the SDX is the very low startup costs. So if they go into an area and they've got some uncertainty with regard to the level of traction that they'll get or the pace with which they can build out, they can start off with one small pizza box. And then if they start to enjoy traction, they can scale that up to stacks of tens of them if they want to. So tens of thousands of customers. So you can go from, 10, 20 customers very cost effectively in the beginning, all the way up to tens of thousands. And, they like that side of it.
Okay, so, as well as the COVID-19 pandemic, this year's seeing a trade war between China and the US, which has placed strains on the supply chain, as you were alluding to in your previous response. How are needs continuing to be met, and how has ADTRAN balanced business needs with consumer needs?
Yeah, it's certainly unprecedented times within the market. And look, nobody likes to trade on other people's misfortune. It's not tasteful to do that. That said, the industry was facing into a massive period of change anyway, because the operators around the world were faced with the technology refresh that they needed to do to really participate in a meaningful way in what we now know as the phrase gigabit society. So a lot of the operators were coming out to market anyway, looking for their next generation access technologies, whether that was XGS-PON for the fiber side of things, or GFast on the copper side of things, or even millimeter wave on the wireless side of things. We saw, it started late last year and now has really become compounded this year, the rising tensions between the US and China. And that's resulted in a lot of supply chain implications out there, which is forcing operators back out to the market. And what we've seen in particular is there's a lot of stockpiling going on, where stock is being held for the very largest of the customers by some of those vendors to make sure they can keep those customers on board. But the net impact of that is they're starving out all their smaller customers. And that's where we're really starting to see a lot of inbound activity coming from that community of operators, where they just simply have been starved out and they're extremely frustrated because their business plans have got turned on their head. So we're being fast tracked into a number of accounts. We've accelerated a program of interoperability now from our OLTs, so that the existing install bases of ONTs that are out there in the field, they can interoperate with our OLTs. So it means that the operators themselves, A, they don't need to write off the asset. They can continue to utilize that asset for the lifetime of it. And B, they don't have to interrupt the service for their customers by swapping out the ONTs. So we're seeing a lot of an ever increasing amount of interest now for that capability.
So enough of the strange year that is 2020. Looking ahead, where do you see ADTRAN fitting into the picture a year from now, and what opportunities is ADTRAN looking to next?
Yeah, no, it's really exciting times ahead. If we look back a little bit to explain how we view the vision going forward, in particular, when we reflect on ADTRAN's international internationalization activities, we really started to make a stronger push into the European market about 12 years ago. And if you reflect back around that time, it was about 10 years ago when most of the service providers across Europe were making their next step forward with regard to broadband infrastructure. So they were moving beyond their initial ADSL deployments and starting to do cabinet-based VDSL, and they were moving beyond their point-to-point fiber deployments over towards PON architectures. And that was roughly around 10 years ago. So at that point in time, ADTRAN, particularly in the European market, was somewhat of an unknown entity. You know, a few people had heard of us. They were willing to give us a good listen to. We even got invited to some of the tenders, but we weren't really being taken that seriously at that stage because we were new market entrants. You know, there was a lot of question marks over us. However, we've invested heavily over the last 10 years, both in building up the teams we have across Europe. We've now got over 300 full-time employees within Europe, but also raising our profile initially as a thought leader, but very much so in the last couple of years as a market disruptor, bringing new innovations to fundamentally change how the operators deploy their infrastructure, but more importantly, how they view ADTRAN as well, which is really, really important. So now what we're seeing is they're now moving on to the next wave of investment as they move beyond VDSL now, and they start to look at GFAST technologies for very short loop copper deployments, but also they're moving beyond GPON over to the next generation of XGS-PON, and they're all back out to the market. So you've got this perfect confluence of a technology refresh occurring. Our brand is now well established, and we've got sufficient referenceability with the customer bases that we've built up over the last 10 years in Europe, coupled with the challenge that's faced due to the debacle between China and the US. So there's a lot of question marks with regard to some of the vendors that are impacted by that. So we kind of see this perfect storm now emerging where all the windows of opportunity are swinging wide open just because of the market forces that were there. And we happen to be in the right place at the right time with the SDX portfolio that really ticks all the boxes. What we've seen is there are a number of operators out there that have early investments in OLT platforms, for example, that are not upgradable to XGS-PON. So those operators are now a little bit gun shy. They're looking at, we've got to move to XGS-PON. Do I really want to buy another chassis-based system that I'm going to run out of capacity on X amount of years down the road? And that's where they're really very interested now in the disaggregated portfolio, because they can see there's no single point of bottleneck within that platform. They'll upgrade bits incrementally over the years as they need to. And a lot of those bits that they upgrade, they can take the old bits out and repurpose them in the network as well.
Great. Thank you, Ronan. It's been a pleasure talking to you today.
Likewise, George. Really appreciate it. Thank you.